Welcome to one of the best preserved battlefields in the world. What happened here one long, deadly summer day in 1778 is considered a turning point in the American Revolution. It's famously known as the Battle of Monmouth.
It's a typical New Jersey summer day. Hazy, hot, humid. Roughly, it was in the upper 90s to 100 degrees in the shade. Closest thing to a major engagement that the war had seen in quite some time.
The major engagement became a gathering of some of the biggest names in history.
Alexander Hamilton, of course, he was here. Aaron Burr was here. John Marshall was here. Nathaniel Greene, Knox, Henry Knox. From New Jersey, we have General Maxwell in charge of the New Jersey Brigade. We have Lord Sterling, General Alexander, who's at this point one of Washington's chief officers. He's in charge of one whole flank of the battle. He's in charge of all the men that are up on that hill with George Washington. From the British side, we have Cornwallis here. We have Clinton.
Inside the award-winning Visitors Center here at Monmouth Battlefield State Park, historian Michael Timpanaro answers questions about the famous battlefield that continues to captivate many of the 500,000 visitors who come here each year.
The first time the American Army actually fights using European tactics and fights toe-to-toe with the British. And it had been a long time since an American, well, at least George Washington led victory for the Americans. So
for the wells where life-saving cool water was drawn and delivered by a heroine nicknamed Molly Pitcher. She became famous during the battle, June 28, 1778. Carrying water to soldiers clad in heavy wool uniforms, 12 hours moving cannons across these hills in the largest single-day battle of the war.
The British pull out of Philadelphia to join their troops in New York. Washington sees his chance and goes for it. After 6 months at Valley Forge, he puts everything his troops have learned to the test. Monmouth Battlefield in Freehold, New Jersey is the site of that pivotal battle. June 24th, 1778, Hopewell, New Jersey.
Gentlemen, I have called this council of war to discuss the feasibility of attacking Clinton's troops in New Jersey.
Planning for the battle, Washington finds himself in conflict with his own officers. Topping the list, General Charles Lee, a former lieutenant colonel in the British Army.
He envied General von Steuben. He didn't like the way Washington had moved so close to this man.
As you all may be aware, I firmly believe it is time to attack.
Lee is Washington's number 2 and a bitter rival. Lee isn't buying that von Steuben's training at Valley Forge has turned the army around, and he's convinced that Americans will never stand up to the British in a head-to-head fight. June 28th, Monmouth, New Jersey. At 5 a.m., Washington's spies send word. 2,000 redcoats lag behind the main British army. Washington orders Lee to engage the enemy. It's almost noon, 96 degrees in the shade. Washington listens for the heated clash of battle, but all he hears are a few lukewarm potshots. By mid-afternoon, he runs into his own troops, moving away from the action.
Boys, step forward.
Yes, sir.
Under whose command are you?
General Lee, sir.
Then what, may I ask, are you doing walking in this direction?
He orders us to retreat, sir.
How many more?
When he spots one of Lee's colonels heading away from the enemy, Washington has seen enough.
What is the meaning of this retreat? Sir? The meaning
Stop
of this
the
retreat?
picture. I don't want you to miss this one. The father of our country is now so angry that according to some historians, he actually swears. You may want the kids to leave the room. Okay, George, go ahead, sorry.
Damn him! Yeah! Yeah!
What we know for sure is that Washington takes charge himself. Suddenly, the redcoats are on top of them. It's a moment one eyewitness, the Marquis de Lafayette, will never forget.
General Washington seemed to arrest fortune with one glance. His presence stopped the retreat. I thought, then as now, that I had never beheld so superb a man.
So Washington simply takes over. He directs a couple delaying actions, and then Washington rides back to the hill that's about 500 yards over there and starts to lay out the defensive line along the ridge.
Now, British grenadiers advance relentlessly into a thicket called the Point of Woods. They pull out a weapon the Americans fear even more than British gunfire.
This is a soldier's bayonet. This is an original from the Revolutionary War.
For the Americans, it's the most dangerous psychological moment of the battle, and the British expect the Yanks to crack.
Up until this time, they had no skill with the bayonet, and bayonet charges by the British had frequently sent them fleeing.
But that was then, and this is now. Archaeologists have found evidence of the sacrifices the Americans make that day.
This is a musket ball that a soldier popped into his mouth when people were being operated on or just in terrible pain. To keep from chipping their own teeth or biting their tongue, they would put a musket ball between their teeth and bite down on it. That's where the expression "bite the bullet" comes from. And this is a musket ball that was absolutely flattened by someone in excruciating pain.
Americans bite the bullet, hold their ground. Von Steuben's lessons have stuck.
This was one of the crucial moments of the American Revolution. They met them bayonet for bayonet, and there was these tremendous clashes all over the battlefield. And some of their officers came right into the mouths of the American guns and were shot dead, and their soldiers followed them. The next thing you know, the British were retreating. But they could not break the American line.
This deadly skirmish buys George Washington precious time to set up his artillery on the high ground. The cannons pound the British troops. It's the longest field artillery duel of the entire war. In the 3-hour clash, thousands of rounds are fired. The evidence provides intriguing clues to a legendary figure who may have fought here. A gun that may well have been manned that day by a figure known to legend as Molly Pitcher. According to legend, when her husband falls to enemy fire, Molly Pitcher steps in.
She took a gun position, running ammunition from the gun box up to the muzzle of the gun.
Eyewitness Joseph Plum Martin picks up the story.
A cannon shot from the enemy passed directly between her legs, carrying away all the lower part of her petticoat. Looking at it with apparent unconcern, she continued her occupation.
American cannons zero in on the elite British 42nd Regiment, known as the Black Watch. Among the most feared soldiers in the British Army. But the British regiment will flank the American artillery, unless Washington snipers can pin them down first. American sharpshooters have been carefully positioned on the Monmouth battlefield. But can they stop Britain's elite Black Watch? For the first time, scientists can measure the damage the snipers could have inflicted. A tight cluster of 60 caliber musket balls, proof of marksmen with firearms experts believe were made in America.
Something very feared by the British was the American rifle. The snipers with American rifles, which are deadly at 200 yards. Probably have a soldier firing down the diagonal of the trees at specific targets. And they're sitting out there just trying to pick off anything that moves.
How effective were they? Experts believe this button was most likely worn by a member of the British 42nd.
And as you can see, there's a section that's sheared off, nice and round sheared off, which indicates it was probably hit by a musket ball. The force of this ball was from back to front, which means that the soldier was wearing it, was hit in the back, and the projectile came through his body and out the front and through the button. The button was the last thing hit. Chances are the soldier who got hit with this did not survive.
5 p.m., June 28th. Britain's finest are caught between fierce artillery fire and advancing American infantry. And elsewhere on the battlefield, the American lines hold. If this was the Americans' test, they aced it.
This is the first time that the main Continental Army saw the main British Army turn their backs and withdraw.
For the British, it's a serious setback. For von Steuben's troops schooled at Valley Forge, it's graduation day. It's a break for the Army and a breakthrough for their leader.
This is also a real milestone in Washington's career. After Monmouth, after this victory, there are no longer any questions. Washington is the undisputed commander-in-chief of the Continental Army.
With spring, the people of the colonies warmed to their leader and his cause.
Valley Forge did more than transform the American Army. It also transformed the opinions of a lot of Americans who were civilians trying to make up their mind which way to go with this war.
In the afterglow of history, Valley Forge becomes a squeaky clean symbol of the American spirit. But for the men who went through the crucible, it was about grinding hardships, not glory. Today, archaeologists are finding out just how difficult their ordeal really was.
They had tenacity, for want of a better word, of an army that refused to dissolve. Every scrap of evidence, every piece of metal, every bone fragment is just unbelievable testament to the sacrifice and devotion of these soldiers.
By the time the war is over, many who once thought Washington incompetent now want to crown him king. And England's King George is certain the American George will go for it.
When the war was over, George III was told by an American in London that Washington was planning to return to Mount Vernon. He wasn't going to become an Oliver Cromwell, a great dictator. And George said, "Sir, if he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." And by God, he was.